session. Please ensure that you mute your mic if you're not speaking, and also please put off your video if you do not have a flow. Of course, also please contribute to the meeting goals, and we also expect to have a regional perspective on this session. All questions can be directed to the chat room and also our Twitter account at EABC Arusha. There's a team that is working on that, so we'll be able to address all our questions. And of course, the meeting will be recorded for reporting purposes, and the report will be shared right after the meeting. So if I can run you through briefly the program today. We expect the meeting to run for an hour or an hour and a half, of course, depending on the questions that you submit. And we'll start with the welcome remarks from the EABC CEO. And of course, we would receive highlights of the report findings from our consultant, Dr. Aaron Eshel. And then we would have a Q&A session after that. And of course, we would receive closing remarks from our partners, GIZ Creating Perspectives. We worked closely with them in producing this report. So if we can officially start the meeting, I think this study is timely for the private sector, and it's very important for businesses in the region. And this is because recently DRC applied to become a member of the East African community. And as the EABC's mandate is to support businesses in the region, we thought we should do a market finding study so that the private sector will be informed on the opportunities that will be presented by the market of DRC. And here we're talking about 81 million people. So this is a huge market for the region. And we thought that market intelligence is crucial for businesses. Hence the EABC's leadership in producing this report. And of course, we hope that the findings of the study will also inform the process of the decision of incorporating DRC into the community, and we hope that it will also expedite that decision due to the opportunities that have been presented by the report. And of course, one of the findings of the report also show that EAC has the advantage of the geographical proximity to DRC, but I think it has been shown that among the countries, if you can mute your mic, CTI. Thank you. Yes, due to the advantage that EAC has due to the geographical proximity, you'll find that most goods that are imported in DRC are from other regions, especially China, Zambia, and other countries. And if you look at the top 10 countries that are importing into DRC, you'll only find that there's only one East African country that is there. So this is an untapped opportunity for the private sector in our region, and we thought that we should be informed before tapping into that market. And of course, currently we are dealing with the pandemic, or the ongoing pandemic, COVID-19. And I think that has created socioeconomic impacts to businesses. And of course, SMEs being vulnerable to economic shocks. We thought that diversifying the market into other regions that we've not tapped into those opportunities is crucial as a recovery strategy for our region. So we hope that after the launch of this report, businesses will realign their focus and, of course, focus their operations to match the growing opportunities that have been presented in DRC through the report. And because the report also identifies the competition, so we hope that businesses will also gauge and benchmark the competition so that they're also able to tap into these opportunities in DRC. And of course, at EABC, our focus would remain to provide such insights to all our members in markets that have not been tapped to insights that will grow their businesses. And of course, we'll still address business-related challenges in accessing these trade opportunities. So EABC will align it as part of its advocacy agenda to make sure that the private sector realizes these trade opportunities. And of course, there's a smooth trade between East African countries and DRC. So with that being said, and of course, without preempting the findings that the consultant will be presenting, I would like to welcome Dr. Aaron Eshel to give us highlights on the findings of the report. And here I would like to also remind you all, as Dr. Aaron is doing his presentation, if you have any question, please jot it down in the chat room, and also our Twitter account at EABC Arusha. I'm going to repeat that. If you can mute your mic. I'm going to repeat that. If you have any question, please put it down on the chat or our Twitter account at EABC Arusha. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Aaron Eshel to run us through the highlights of the report. Welcome, Dr. Aaron.
Thank you very much, Miriam. On behalf of the Creating Perspectives Project, I would like to welcome you all today to this presentation. I'm Dr. Aaron Eshel, Principal Consultant at AfriTrade Enterprise and Advisory Services in Kenya, and I'm also Senior Lecturer at the Business School. I'm the one who combs through this data in the DRC to kind of find opportunities for EAC businesses in the DRC. And my goal today is very simple. It's just to pique your interest in this very lucrative and insatiable market. And in what way? How do I pique your interest? I'd want you to make informed business decisions using data rather than word of mouth. I would like Patrick, kindly share. I can't see the slide. Patrick? Patrick?
Yes, the slide is visible, Doctor.
I can't see it on my screen. How do I get that? I am yet to see the slide. What do I do to get the slide?
If I may, Dr. Aaron.
Yes, please.
Maybe you are focused on your video. Just check down there. You may see a small box which looks like it's a presentation of a slide. Maybe it's that way on your side.
Small box. I'm seeing my video.
Yeah, then you just click it.
No.
Because the slide is visible on our sides. Maybe it's
okay,
just
let me use Vincent, and I'll cue it in to move to the next slide. Thank you, Vincent. So, like I said, my goal today is to pique your interest into the DRC market, a very lucrative and yet insatiable market. Essentially, it would be very hard for any EAC particular partner state to actually exhaust the potential for trade in the DRC. So this presentation is divided into, can we go to the next slide? This presentation is divided into the structure of DRC's inputs. We're just going to look at them in general. Then we shall look at what was the scope of this inquiry, what kind of information do we expect, and we shall go specifically to the DRC trade in the business clusters that formed this particular study. And the gist of this study, which is the potential for trade in the business clusters. And finally, we shall look at some of the hurdles that businesses have tried to go to the DRC are facing. And we shall conclude and have a very productive Q&A. Could we go to the next slide? Next slide, please. The DRC is the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa with a very lucrative population, 81 million. You remember very well what the American business executive says about China, that if only one Chinese gave you $1 per month, it would be very good to the bottom line. So at a population of 81 million, this is a country not to ignore. Interestingly, the DRC borders 9 countries, 5 of which are in the EAC, and this is very important. 5 of these countries are in the EAC, means the rest, the 4, are not in the EAC. This represents significant geographical proximity. It means we are very close to the DRC and we share a very long border to the east of the DRC. However, if you look at the trade data, it's good to show you that the trade we have with the DRC is only at 13%, it only averages 13.5% over the years. And this is wrong and quite contrary to the gravity model of trade. This shouldn't happen. 13 is not enough. But there's some good news. Last year, the DRC officially applied to join the EAC. What is the implication of this? This means that we are going to be able to trade with the DRC on favorable terms in the near future. Very, very favorable terms. And the question is, are we ready, operationally and strategically ready for that time when the DRC fully joins with us? And a good starting point to answer this question is, what does the DRC get from the rest of the world, right? Who supplies it? And is the EAC well represented? As a starting point to orient ourselves with this very huge market of 81 million people, how well represented are the EAC businesses in supplying products that the DRC needs in bulk? And let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Hello, yes. Now, what you're seeing there is to answer the question, what does the DRC seek from the rest of the world? Who supplies it? Right? Who is gaining ground in the DRC and who is losing ground in such a lucrative market? You'll notice in 2019, goods worth 6.6 billion, billion with the B, was imported into this particular country, the DRC. And you'll notice that 60% of the 6.6 billion was only distributed among 3 countries. The largest share went to China at 31.2%, South Africa at 15.8%, and Zambia. And then again, who else is growing as a supplier of the products into the DRC? Who is gaining market share in the DRC? Thailand, between 2015 and 2019, Thailand grew by 75%. The Netherlands at 41% and Zambia at 18%. Then who is losing ground in the DRC? France lost 18% in the same period. Kenya, unfortunately, also lost 11%. This is not good. And Germany lost 10%. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Now, away from the rest of the world, let's look at our backyard, which is the EAC. What you're seeing shows you the structure of EAC's trade with the DRC. How have we been performing between 2012 and 2018? Who is losing ground? Who is gaining ground? And what do we send to the DRC, right? Are our exports actually needed in the DRC, or we are concentrating on stagnant or declining sectors? You will notice that as the EAC, we mainly send petroleum oil, wheat, rice, cement, and palm oil, which is good. And if you look at that graph, it's only one particular country, and that is Rwanda, in green, the line you see in green, that is actually gaining ground in the DRC. You will see that Tanzania lost ground for a while between 2014 and 2017, but 2017 to 18, it started rising. You will notice that Kenya is losing ground, the 11% that we saw. And this is not a very beautiful picture. We need to see all those lines for all the particular countries almost copy what Rwanda is doing. Let's go to the next slide. This report is particularly relevant to certain business clusters, not all the business clusters. And here in particular, we are looking at businesses in the prepared foodstuff industries, those in the plastics and rubber industries, those in the textiles and articles textiles, and a little bit of the leather, not all leather in general, but a little bit articles of leather represented by chapter 42. The product classification system that was used is the HS system, and we are going to have a quick 30-second review of how this works, because most of the data here has been coded and represented using the HS system. So for the business practitioners, we're going to have a 30-second review of this so that later as you're reading the report, you can easily pinpoint a particular product of your interest. The data sources that inform this inquiry were mainly the ITC's trade map, International Trade Papers trade map, and the market access map. Now, I need you to pay attention to this one particular limitation of this study. You will notice that this study used the national data, the entire DRC. And the entire DRC is so huge that I'm told it's the size of the entire Western Europe. Entire Western Europe. This means that whereas the East African partner states actually only trade mostly with the eastern stretch of the DRC, all the way from Uganda down to Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, through Lake Tanganyika, down to Zambia. However, this is not a significant limitation. Why? You will notice in page 18 that Zambia, that almost has the same geographical location as the rest of the EAC partner states, actually managed to send the equivalent of what all partner states sent to the DRC, and that is about $1 billion, 866. And you will notice that it's actually the third largest supplier of these products into the DRC. So the geographical location versus the national and regional data shouldn't be a handicap for the interested business person. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, this is a quick 30-second review of how the HS code system works. What you're seeing is, as you move through the data, you will see that products are grouped into different clusters. And using the example of, let's say, a pineapple, you'll notice that at the 2 digits, a product is so broad, right? And that is called the chapter level, the 08. You'll notice that if you're to find out specifically what a pineapple is for international trade, you will first have to find out which chapter it belongs to, and that is chapter 08, which is edible fruit and nuts and peels. Then, if you break it down to the 4 digits, the pineapple still is grouped together with dates, figs, avocados, and etc. Now, at the 6 digit, which you'll see a lot in the report, here we are very, very, very specific. It will only be the pineapple. It will not be avocado, dates, or figs. So you'll find that the international ID for something like a pineapple looks like 080430. So you're going to see this a lot in the report. We needed this so that we are all at par when we're describing the opportunities that exist. So let's go to the next slide. Here, we're interested in the structure of DRC's trade in one of the clusters, which is the processed foods. And this chapter contains products from chapter 16 to 24, lots of it. What are we interested in here? How much does the DRC bring in of processed foodstuffs? From who does it source these foodstuffs? And in particular, that should pique our interest. What do they want most in this particular cluster? If you look at the next slide, next slide, please. May we go to the next slide? Yes, if you look at the next slide, it's showing you DRC's imports of anything in this prepared foodstuff category. And for anybody in this industry, this should be very interesting because it is almost $500 million of this. North of $500 million. And anything in this category includes beverages, sugar, and tobacco, cocoa. All this chapter is well represented. And you will notice that 65% of the foodstuff is only contained, of the $500 million is contained in only 3 chapters. That is chapter 22, beverages, spirits, chapter 17, sugars and sugar confectionery, and chapter 19, preparations of cereals, flour, and starch. In the cluster of prepared foodstuffs, the DRC needs these most, right? I want you to pay attention to chapter 19, which is preparations of cereals, flour, and starch. In 2017, it needed was, in 2019, it rose to $94 million. That is a 43% rise in the space of about 3 years, right? This is a lucrative sector. Now let's answer the next question. Who supplies this? Who do they get this from? Let's go to the next slide. Who is providing these prepared foodstuffs? The graph you're seeing is showing the supply market of DRC's imports of prepared foodstuffs. And back to the limitation that I mentioned, look at that. One particular country has a very unproportional share of the prepared foodstuff industry. And this country is not from China, it's not from Europe, it is not from the US, it is our neighbor. In fact, it is closer to us than even the DRC. But look at that, look at Zambia's interest in that particular sector. It is just soaring year after year. What is happening to the rest? Right? If you look at the next slide, what is the EAC story? Let's go to the next slide. Let us go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Patrick, may we go to the next slide? Patrick, we need to go to the next slide. Patrick? Patrick, may we go to the next slide, please? Yes, thanks. We have skipped one. Just the slide before that. We want to see the EAC story in the prepared foodstuff industry. The slide before that. EAC supply of prepared foodstuffs. The slide before that. Thank you. What you're seeing is the EAC's share in the prepared foodstuff industry. And out of the $500 million market, the EAC at most has done about 146 million. And this is particularly dominated by Kenya and Uganda. Tanzania and Rwanda almost have a similar proportion and broadly are represented. That is what you're seeing from the EAC. But let's move to the next slide. The next slide, please. Yes, what are you seeing here? Businesses in this particular cluster ought to pay attention to these products. If you're in the food and processed food industries, these particular products are of interest to you. Now, you'll notice that if you look at the column of codes, we were previously only presenting 2-digit codes when all the products were grouped together. But in this particular case, we are very, very specific at the 6-digit level. So in this particular cluster, you'll notice that about 10% goes to non-alcoholic beverages, excluding water, fruit, and vegetables. Raw cane sugar is doing very well. And a very interesting product from my side is the sweet biscuits. We shall later delve deep into this. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. You notice the fonts in red or orange. The question there is, what is so special about Zambia? Number one, from the graph we saw that it is the main supplier of processed foodstuffs. And not only that, it also represents in all the most sought after. Non-alcoholic beverages were the most sought after. Who is the front runner? Zambia. It almost takes the entire market at 54 million. The next supplier, who is South Africa, hardly even gets $1 million. And then there's Belgium and Spain. What is special about Zambia that is so endowed that the rest of East Africa doesn't have? Look at the next product, raw cane sugar. Zambia, again, almost doubling what Guatemala presents, South Africa presents, India, Malawi. East Africa is not represented. Look at sweet biscuits, of which I think we all manufacture in the EAC. This is one of the fastest growing product classes. In 2015, it was just $16 million. Now we are speaking of $31 million. Who again is grabbing this entire market? It's Zambia again at 24.6 million. India, Turkey, South Africa. Where is the EAC in this very lucrative market? Let's move to the next cluster of textiles. Next slide, please. Yes. Here again, we're interested in this. Who supplies this textile, right? All the products from chapter 50 to 63, the cotton, the silk, the worn clothes, and it is. Who supplies it? How much of these does DRC import over the years? And what are the most lucrative ones? If you move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. What you're seeing is the DRC's imports of textiles. And if you look at the code, they are still all grouped together and nothing specific. But this particular market last year was worth about $235 million, not something that is small. But you'll notice that 60% of that particular market is also constituted in only 3 product categories, which is chapter 63, 61, and 52. Cotton, other made-up textile articles, and articles of apparel. If you move to the next slide, let us find out who is supplying this. And that is why we are here. How are we represented as the EAC in this lucrative market? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Let's look at the supplying market of textiles into the DRC. Yes, once again, the only East African country ranks number 9, Kenya, and 68% is supplied by 3 countries who don't even belong to the African continent. That is China, Belgium, and India. 68% of the $235 million market is hardly represented, is hardly taken by any EAC set. Let's look at the next slide at the EAC story. How are we doing in this particular sector? Next slide, please. That graph shows you the EAC export of textiles into the DRC. The blue line, deep blue line on top, shows 2012 to 2018. But I want you to notice something very, very strange. The lines for the entire EAC aggregation almost mirrors that of one country alone, Rwanda, which is the deep orange. You notice that the entire EAC aggregation is almost to that of one particular country, which is Rwanda. Implication is that it is almost shouldering the entire textile burden for the entire EAC state in this DRC market. Then let's look at what kind of textiles do these people actually want, but the DRC will pay top dollar for. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. May we go to the next slide? Yes. These are the most sought after textiles. It has moved away from the 2-digit, which was 6352 and the rest. Now we are very specific on the kind of textiles that the DRC needs. And you will see that ranking number one at $37.2 million are worn clothing and clothing accessories, including blankets, traveling bags, households, and the rest. Next are the plain woven fabrics of cotton, right? Especially if a country like Uganda, where cotton grows particularly well. These are at $23.9 million in 2019, and the rest. But I want you to pay particular attention to product code 610342, men's or boys' trousers. In 2017, it took in $1.3 million. In 2019, this particular product was $7.9 million was taken into the ERC. It's growing faster than any other product category in this. So anyone in the textile sector ought to investigate that particular one further. Let us go to the plastics and rubber cluster. Next slide, please. Yes. This one particularly has two products, the plastic cluster, which is under Chapter 39, and then the rubber under 4 and 40. Let's find out again of this cluster from who does this pick these products, and how much of these is the EAC participating in. That particular slide, this thing is showing you that combined, the plastics and rubbers in 2019 grossed $370.5 million, although the bulk of it went into the plastics. And this is a very interesting cluster, especially in relation to the EAC. Let's move to the next slide and find out who supplies these plastics and rubber products into the DRC, right? Who supplies these products into the DRC? If you look at the next slide, it will show you DRC's imports of plastics. 39. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yes, it will show you the DRC's imports of plastics. Who is supplying this particular plastic? Look specifically at, once upon a time it was South Africa, and from nowhere, around 2017, 2018, China just took over and went with a bang. It was just shooting for the skies, right? If you go to the next slide, chapter 40, the story is almost the same. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yes. The heading has a problem. It's supposed to be imports of rubber. The chapter is okay, it's 40. It's almost the same. China has been supplying the rubber products needed in the DRC for a considerable past. And unfortunately, in 2018, there was a drop from South Africa. Now, the next slide is going to answer the question, what is the EAC's story? right? I said my role today is to pick your interest into this market. What you see there, I hope the data is wrong, because if it is right, then it leaves a lot to be desired. This is the EAC's exports of plastics and rubber into the DRC from 2010. I even had to drag it further to find out where were we once upon a time. Once upon a time, it wasn't that bad, but just look at that graph from 2013 to 2018. It's on free fall, right? If we include the 2019 data, I don't know which direction it takes, but this particular sector was about $380 million, and the EAC as an aggregate is actually losing interest in this. What is happening? If you look at the next slide, let's find out what kind of plastics the DRC actually needs, and are we present there? Next slide, please. What you're seeing are articles of plastic that will get you money in the DRC. The question is this the kind of product you are producing or something else? Product number one under Chapter 39 is polypropylene in primary forms. 2019, $27 million worth of this was brought into the DRC, up from $18.9 million in 2017, right? In the last discussions that we're having, look at the product called sacks and bags, from $19.5 million to $21.3 million. The question is, what proportion of the $21.3 million do you need to break even to make that good cut? So in the plastic industry, these are the products that are most sought after in that particular country. If you look at the next slide please, is the story of rubber. What is the story of rubber? What kind of rubber products are needed in the DRC? Supposing you're in the rubber business, what would you take to the DRC? What they need most and continue to need are new pneumatic tires, specifically those used in the construction and mining industry. And this shouldn't be a surprise given the nature of Congo, which is very mineral rich. The next kind of tires that they need in the Congo, and on both about $12.9 million worth in 2019, are tires to do with buses and lorries, nothing to do with saloon cars and the rest, or tires for motorcycles, specifically tires to do with buses and lorries. But the one that is gaining more traction has to do with tires used in construction and the mining industry. That's enough about the rubber, the plastics and rubber plaster. Let us have a quick glance at the leather sector. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Can we go to the yes? The slide here, specifically the data that was extracted only concentrated on one particular leather product, which is Chapter 42, and it will show you that over the years, in 2019, actually, DRC brought in about $24 million worth of this. But most interestingly, I want to look at who is supplying this particular leather. The only African representatives are South Africa and Zambia, and China almost owns this particular market, right? At 21.9 million of the 24.9 million, the contribution of the rest is quite insignificant. If you look at the next slide, that has to do with the supply market. Next slide, please. You can see that the graph above, the line above, shows China's proportion of this, and the rest are hardly players in this particular sector, the leather sector, at Chapter 42. Now, if you go to the next slide, let us find out, in this particular leather chapter, what does China need, what does the DRC need most? And you'll notice that only one product category under Chapter 42, 0 to 12, almost dominates this at $14.2 million. The next, which is handbags, is only just $4 million. So anyone in this particular business cluster will be interested in trunks, suitcases, and the rest, right? Handbags just brought in about $1 million. So let us move to the gist of this presentation, which is the potential for trade. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, the potential for trade. If you're a business in the EAC and you have gotten interested in the DRC, where should you put your money? Where is the demand sufficient? Now, how did we come to the potential trade? There are two ways. You can either look at the most sought after product, right, by the DRC that you are not producing and probably start producing it, or you can also look at what your nation has strengthened vis-a-vis what the DRC imports from the rest of the world, and look at the proportion that you send. So here, we'll look at the partnership export of a product, a given product to the DRC, vis-a-vis the DRC's imports of that particular product from the world over time, and then we shall also compare to that partner state exports of the product to the rest of the world, showing do you have capacity as your volumes being grown, and should you probably diversify into the DRC. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. Now, remember, we looked at 3 product clusters for all the EAC partner states, and we cannot present the potential for trade in each product cluster for all the countries. It will take a lot of time. However, we only picked a couple for each product category, but it will be representative and be able to understand. What you're seeing there is Kenya's it's the processed food category. And you'll notice that in this particular category, 3 products are the most sought after in the DRC. What are they? Look at chapter 17, look at chapter 22, and look at chapter 21. At the chapter 17, the sugars and sugar confectionery cluster of business interest, in 2019, the DRC sold these products worth $118.2 million. If you look at the chapter 22, beverages, spirits, and vinegar, these were worth $125.2 million. And then if you look at the preparations of cereals and the rest, it is 94. These are very, very lucrative markets. But the question is, how much of these does Kenya actually get? Now, you notice that 43% of Kenya's exports to DRC in this category comprise of chapter 24. What is chapter 24? Tobacco and manufactured tobacco substitutes. It is not in chapter 21, it is not in chapter 17 or chapter 22. But if you look at Kenya's exports, which is the third column, Kenya's exports of processed foods to the rest of the world, you will notice that a chapter like sugars and sugar confectioneries, where you have about $49.3 million worth of this product, and all that is sent to Kenya, to DRC, is about 8.6 million. If we go to the next slide, let's look at the Ugandan story. I think my mic is muted. My mic is muted.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. The story of Uganda, of the processed food stuff, it is quite spread out between sugars and confectionery. You will notice that, okay, about 15.9 million in the sugars and confectioneries in the beverages and spirit sector, about 10.3 million in 2018. But you have to pay attention to the highlighted column that is in orange. Look at how much of this is the DRC bringing of this particular product. What is your market share? And how much of it do you actually produce? Is there potential for export market diversification, right? You look at Uganda, chapter 17, sugar and sugar confectioneries. We're actually doing very well. $108.3 million in 2018, of which only $15.9 million went to that market. Now, Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. In this particular section, we are going to delve deeper into, let's say, just 2 product chapters, right? There's a lot in, but we're going to try to break down these chapters into the 6 digits. Remember, we said the 6 digit is more specific. Now, in chapter 17, sugars and sugar confectionaries, in 2019, the DRC imported products in this category worth $118.2 million. However, in that particular category, of the products you're seeing on your screen right now, the major supply market was Zambia, again at $66.4 million, Guatemala, and then Kenya represented the EAC in this, right? But I want you to look at a very weird product, a product you never paid attention to on the street. It's something called chewing gum, product code 170410. You look at between 2017 and 2019, the demand for chewing gum in the DRC goes by 28.7%. The question is, who supplied this chewing gum? Right? A product as innocuous as chewing gum is worth $12.2 million. And where does it come from? It comes from Zambia at $5.7 million, almost half. Kenya at $3.5 million, and Brazil. Zambia, Kenya is tolerable, but Brazil at $1.2 million, where are the rest? And this is a deep down breakdown of chapter 17 alone. Let's go to the next slide and look at chapter 19. Next slide, please. Chapter 19, another very interesting story. The chief basic story is a very weird narrative. That product code 190531, in 2012, toothpaste is worth 16.3 million. Why imported the DRC? In 2019, they bought in toothpaste worth $31.5 million. That is a 93.2% rise. But that's not the interesting story. The interesting story is that in 2012, Zambia only supplied 678,000. That's what they did in 2012, 678,000 worth of these products. 7 years later, they have moved to that from $24.6 million. Right? Zambia is in Africa, the EAC is in Africa. What is so special about them gaining this particular market share? Enough about the processed food. Let's look at textiles. The potential for trade in the textile sector. Next slide, please. Can we go to the textile sector? Next slide. Yes, thank you. Now, of all the EAC partner states, Rwanda exports most of the textiles to DRC, right? At 2018 figures of $16.3 million. However, look at that chart very carefully. It is concentrated in only one textile category, and that is chapter 63, which comprises of other made-up textile articles. If you look at a close look at the DRC column, the site reveals that it's also a lucrative sector at 65.1 million in 2019, right? So it basically provides an opportunity for greater market share and also an opportunity for diversification. But you also notice that on the DRC column, there are other sectors that are actually performing very well. Look at the cotton, chapter 52. You will notice that in 2019, products worth $34 million came in. If you look at other sectors, 61 articles of apparel and clothing accessories that are knitted, 44.6 million came in. However, our largest representative from the EAC in the DRC is only concentrated in one product category. Of the $16.3 million it spent, 15.4 is concentrated in one product category. Let's go to the next slide. The question is, what are some of the lucrative textile sectors in the DRC? If you're in the textile business, where would you want to put your money? Next slide, please. Yes. what categories of textile are most sought after in the DRC? You notice that these are worn clothing and clothing accessories, blankets and traveling rags, and plain woven fabrics of cotton containing more than or equal to 85% of cotton by weight and that. But the interesting story is, look at the suppliers of these products. They're highlighted. The most sought after product that brought in 37.2 million in 2019 was supplied by the US, Canada, China, and India, Belgium. None, Africa. Go to the next product. China dominates the product, the $22.9 billion. The Netherlands, India, and Belgium. Once again, the EAC is hardly represented in this particular product cluster. Let's go to the last category, which is potential for trade in plastics. Plastics and rubber, the potential for trade. Yes, the most sought after plastic product that we saw is that one, polypropylene in its primary form. A total of 2.7 million was brought in 2019. And look at the EAC's representation. We're hardly anywhere in this particular plastics category. Go to the next slide and we look at some of the other sought after plastics categories. Next slide, please. Yes, this kind of plastic is also needed, and at $2.5 million in 2019, it is very, very lucrative, and it's very good for business in this. Once again, the EAC is not represented. Let's go to a more familiar category of plastics, which is the next slide. Sacks and bags. I think this shouldn't be so hard for the manufacturers. Any EAC SME ought to explore the sacks and bag category. Imagine a fraction of a 21.2 million market can do very good to the bottom line of a manufacturer in this category. And finally, let's look at the potential for trade in rubber. Next slide, please. This needed a visual presentation to see how much there is business in this particular cluster, the rubber cluster. And remember, once again, we said it is the new mnemonic tires of rubber and the kind used in construction and mining or industrial use, right? Kindly go to the next slide. And then we look at who is supplying this rubber that is so sought after in the DRC. Could it be Tanzania? Could it be Rwanda? Could it be Uganda? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, this rubber that the mining and construction industry is looking for in bulk to the point of paying $27 million. Who is bringing it in? Once again, South Africa, China, Zambia, and France. There's no mention of any of the EAC partnerships. And what you have to pay attention to is that the DRC in particular is so mineral rich that such a product, right, given the right circumstances, is going to be needed almost for the foreseeable future, right? The others that are needed, of course, we saw are the buses and the ones needed for the lorries, but they are not growing in demand as much as the ones needed for construction. And let's go to the next slide. The hurdles, the challenges. Of course, at the end of the study, we managed to get a couple of firms doing business in the DRC from each of the clusters. And specifically, we tried to find out challenges that are related to specific border posts. So for instance, you will see that if someone's in rubber and plastics cluster, however, and takes this product to the DRC through Koboko, Bwera, Mpondo, and Paida, chances are that you are going to face some challenges taking your products based on where the border crossing. It is not uniform. Compared to if you're in the processed food cluster, you will notice that those who go through Goma, Koboko, and Pondwe do not face the same challenges as those who go through Mahangi. And then the textiles, the farm that represents us, the textiles actually takes these products through Goma, and you will see that the challenges they face are not the same. This is a very important insight. You'll notice that where you see red, chances that your products are going to be delayed or even denied entry into the DRC because of that particular reason, right? And you notice that the one that cuts across, regardless of the border post, regardless of the product cluster, are the requests for additional trade documents, right? But regardless of what border post you take, regardless of what product you're taking, you expect some delays to do with requests for additional trade documents. These challenges or hurdles were derived from the common non-tariff barriers that are not often reported, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And these exporters were asked, to what extent do these ones delay or hinder your business in the DRC? And what you see is color-coded all the time means better 100% that this is going to happen, right? The only outlier here is that the border crossing through Goma hardly faces any poor road infrastructure. I would like to see a picture of that road. And a bi-national policy like the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda is not going to stop your products going into the DRC that much. Let us go to the next slide, which is the last one. Last slide, please. What are the 2 cents we can take from this particular presentation? Remember, at the beginning, I said my role today is to pique your interest in this particular market, the DRC. The report that you're going to receive is quite exhaustive. It is quite exhaustive, it's more than 88 pages. But what can you take home? We wanted to find out, what does the DRC seek from the rest of the world? Number 2, who is supplying it? And number 3, what are the most lucrative, what are the most sought after product categories, right? And as you can see, a product as innocuous as sweet as chewing gum actually has huge potential in such a market. And the question is, look at 47% of the DRCs are just dominated by 2 supplying markets that are not even close to the DRC. That is China and South Africa. And then you have the story of Zambia. Zambia is number 3. Zambia's exports are almost the same as the entire EAC combined. What is so special about Zambia? Now, given the geographical proximity, it is so important. And the psychic distance, the Eastern DRC almost speaks Swahili, right? Rwanda speaks French. Why don't we have a greater market share in this? What is not going right? Now, the question you have to take is, are our businesses declining in promising sectors? Are the businesses declining in stagnant sectors, which is good? Or are the businesses growing in promising sectors? That is what we want to hear. Or are the businesses growing in stagnant sectors? Now, let us take a very quick glance at the case of plastics. None of the EAC partnerships is actually supplying the plastics of the DRC needs. The same case with the processed foods. Spending lots of cigarettes and probably what they need are biscuits. Now, this potential of trade can be looked at in different ways. You can decide to concentrate on the most sought after products that you're probably producing, you may be producing it or not, and decide to diversify, or just increase yourself in what you're already exporting relative to the market size, that's presenting the opportunity for market diversification and even product diversification. Now, lastly, you have to notice that the DRC has the highest import and export transaction cost in Africa. That means you, as a business, chances that you are going to work extra hard to gain these dollars from the DRC are very, very high. We saw the challenges. Right? Having the highest transaction cost in Africa has got an implication. But as business people, the extent of dexterity that is needed is beyond description. However, those who make it, as you can see the case of Zambia, it makes a very good bottom line for your business. Thank you very much for listening. That's the end of the presentation. And it's the time for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eshel, for those insights. I think all the participants were also shocked to realize that other countries are taking advantage of DRC, and the EAC countries not yet utilizing. I think it was quite shocking to see how Zambia has captured that market significantly. And if I can start with the questions that we have already received, Doctor, I think I'll just read you the questions, then you can start addressing them. I think in the conclusion, you tried to shed light on why Zambia, but I think you can elaborate further. People want to know what Zambia has more than other EAC countries, that it has been able to capture that market significantly. And of course, in EAC, Rwanda has also come out quite promising in terms of realizing that market. So participants also want to know what advantage does Rwanda and Zambia specifically have more than other EAC partner states. That is the first question. The second question, there's a participant who wants to know if there are any insights on toothpaste and cosmetics. That is the second one. The third question is that Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda are producers of plastic and sacks in EAC. They want to know what is the reason that DRC prefers China in this category more than EAC countries. Of course, the fourth question is that EAC countries, so DRC is a part of COMESA and SADC. And of course, countries that are member states of those regs can take advantage of that market. But they want to know if DRC joins EAC, what is the added advantage for other EAC countries compared to the advantages that they would get from COMESA or SADC in taking advantage of the DRC market. And of course, the last question for now is about DRC also can provide a lot of raw materials for other EAC countries. For example, minerals and other supplies that can be quite useful as we try to develop regional value chains in EAC. So what is also there in store for East African countries from DRC? What raw materials are there that they can also take advantage on, especially minerals that are just exported directly to Asia? Is there any opportunity in that category where we can process them within the region and take advantage of that? So for now, Dr. Eshel, if you can address those questions, and I'm still taking questions from the chat room for all participants.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Now I'll go to question 2 and question 5. It's almost similar. Wants to know the potential for toothpaste and cosmetics. Remember the report at the beginning, I said we are concentrating on 3 product clusters, which is processed foods, plastics, and then the textiles. However, if a particular business needs this kind of data, with this particular study in depth, only concentrating in a particular product you're interested in, can be done, right? The skills are available, the data is available, all you have to do is request. But this particular report did not go deep in the toothpaste and cosmetics. If you look at the raw materials, this study mainly was one-way traffic. We are asking what can we send to the DRC. However, there is also a lot that the DRC can bring for us. Similar to question number 2, this can be done. For instance, you may find that you're sourcing a particular raw material for your business from thousands of kilometers away, and yet DRC is supplying it in bulk. Once again, the skill set for crunching this data exists. and we can actually exhaustively break it down to a very specific industry that one requests for, right? Remember, this was one-way traffic, but also the two-way traffic can be done. If you look at the question, why Zambia? In the process of doing this study, it kept coming up, right? It kept coming up. However, you will notice that in the previous past, one particular country that has taken in enough of China, of the Chinese businesses, is Zambia, right? And I can't definitively say there's a link between the influx of Chinese in Zambia and their increased production capacity, but this can also be investigated further, right? The report is mostly descriptive. It is telling you this is what is happening, right? We did not go further to find out what is that Zambia has that the rest of us do not have. Same with Rwanda. This wasn't investigated. It wasn't one of the points of inquiry. What does Rwanda have that the rest don't have? And you notice that they dominate the textile sector, and yet the rest also have a very vibrant textile sector. DRC, member of COMESA and SADC, when it joins the EAC, what is going to happen? This is related to what we call the spaghetti ball effect, when you have multiple affiliations to different trading blocks. But in terms of trade, if you look at the report, there's a section that is presenting the regional policies that may affect trade in that, and it specifically relates to the rules of origin. As a member of COMESA, the DRC has got a very different rules of origin when dealing with COMESA members, at the same time, different when dealing with the SADC members. And you notice that the only EAC partnership that is not a member of COMESA is Tanzania, but is a member of the SADC. So if it joins the EAC, the DRC joins the EAC, these rules of origin will be uniform for all the partner states, not a different one from Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan, then a different set of rules of origin for Tanzania. This, again, can also be explored further. It was beyond the scope of the report. I hope, is there any question I missed out? Oh, yes, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda manufacture plastics and sacks. Why does DRC prefer China? No, it's not like the DRC prefers China. You have to understand that countries do trade, but it's the businesses, the individuals that do international business. As a country, we say Uganda trades with Kenya, but there are those micro individual farms that do business with Kenya, not as a nation, right? So, which was part of an offshoot of the project. It's like once we find out these opportunities, how does someone get in touch with, let's say, an importer of plastics and sacks and say, I make this product. Why are you picking it from China? I can deliver this and the rest, which is the next step. Remember, this report was to orient the businesses with the opportunities in DRC, and later the next step is to walk the talk. Right. I hope I've answered all the 5 questions. Any other?
I think there was a question also about insights on toothpaste and cosmetics.
Yes, I said the scope, toothpaste and cosmetics do not fall under the clusters of processed foods or the clusters of plastics or textile. However, if a farm that produces these products is interested, right, they can reach us through the Creating Perspectives Project of GIZ, and this information exists, the skill set to mine it exists, and make inferences from it, right? But it wasn't presented in this report.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, I have a couple of questions also. The first one says that what caused the 11% loss in market share for Kenya, and what can they do to regain it? That is the first question. And the second question is that could the fall in plastics exports be attributed to the ban on plastics in some of the East African countries? That is the second question. And then the third question is, what are the investment incentives in DRC for EAC investors? If you can, participants are asking if there are any investment incentives currently available for EAC investors. And I think we have one of our partners here who had raised his hand. Marvin, you had a question. If you can unmute your mic and just ask the consultants directly.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for the insightful information between the trends of SMEs, EAC, as well as DRC. My question was, I think it would be interesting to look at the role of the different bilateral agreements as well as FTAs to account for the increasing volumes of trade. For instance, I think the uniqueness of Zambia is that ever since they signed their bilateral agreement with DRC, I think the exports to the DRC market increased already by 39% between 2017 and 2018 alone. And of course, also, Rwanda has a bilateral agreement with DRC, I think, which was signed in 2016, which would also explain why in the presentation that you had, you have less NTBs occurring between the Goma crossing points into DRC, which would mean already that there is sort of like trade facilitation going on. So this would be a good point to explore to then justify, with now DRC joining the EAC, would the EAC SMEs benefit from the respective preferential treatment? Then also it would be interesting to look at the areas wherein the EAC SMEs have competitive advantage over countries like South Africa. The interesting point actually between the trade between Zambia and DRC is that in the same time that the exports increased from Zambia to DRC, the imports decreased. However, the imports increased from South Africa into Zambia. So maybe it's good to look at what specific products can the SMEs, can the EAC SMEs leverage on, whereby South Africa doesn't have higher competitive advantage regarding economies of scale, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marvin. If you need to start with this this particular point, what specific products does the EAC SMEs have a competitive advantage over, let me say, suppliers like South Africa or Zambia? You'll notice that the report is actually about over 88 pages, and it is actually possible to delve deep in each SME cluster and run a comparison between what South Africa is doing or Zambia versus the EAC SMEs. However, this particular presentation, I did not go deep into this for the specifics. And thank you for that. It is the bilateral trade agreement. I think it explains the situation that we had. What is so unique about Zambia, right? I wasn't aware of this bilateral trade agreement between them, but now it explains why they almost export the same as the entire EAC partner states. But I think once they join, once DRC joins the EAC, it will probably override this, and we shall probably enjoy the same. However, you mentioned this was very interesting, the Rwanda DRC border post, where the exporter mainly reported a smooth transaction between the two countries. I think this should be a learning point for the other EAC partner states, especially those who share a border with the DRC, and understand this smooth transaction. But in the report, you will see there's a section that is looking at initiatives that are trying to make sure that trade between these border points is as smooth as possible. And probably I predict in the next couple of years, this is not going to be a problem. There's a question to do with what caused the 11% loss in Kenya. This I don't know. It's just what is reflected. And you can also see the other graph that we had whereby the EAC was totally losing out on the plastics. Could it be related to the ban in plastics? And what are the odds that these are accepted plastics? Because we saw that these were polymers in their primary forms, and probably the only one related to plastics had to do with the packaging and the rest. The question to do with the investment incentives in the EAC and the DRC, I do not have this information for now, but I am sure it can also be explored. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I see also time is not on our hand. I'll just allow Kennedy, who has also raised his hand, for one last question before we close this session. Welcome, Kennedy.
Thank you so much. My question, I know there was an issue that was raised about the trade through the borders, and I'm really curious to know whether they have one.
Kennedy, you're not clear.
Oh, sorry.
I'm losing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Yes, I was wondering whether the
Kennedy?
DRC. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please repeat the question.
I was wondering whether the DRC has a one-stop border post.
You're not clear. Kindly type it.
Okay, let me do that.
Okay.
I think there's another question that has been posted here by Dr. Samuel Nyantahe about the textile cluster. It says that in the study report of the used clothes or mitumba, imports are substantial. At the same time, textile manufacturers in EAC are concerned about the relaxation of restrictions on imports of mitumba to the region. So what is the likely impact for EAC exports of mitumba to DRC from EAC?
Okay, let me just get some data on the textiles. It is the largest. You will notice that the second hand or the used clothing is quite substantial. However, you can also notice that other clusters, look at the one for cotton, right? Product code 52, cotton, textile products made of cotton. In 2016, this market was worth $39.6 million. And in 2018, it actually peaked to $45.5 million, although it dropped by around $10 million in 2019. But whereas this is also huge in all our partner states, actually, other sectors are actually, other textile clusters or chapters are good business in the DRC. If you look at the used clothing, is mainly about 65 million of the 235 million, meaning there's something else that is substantial. If you look at the potential for trade in cotton products for Uganda exports cotton-made products worth $33 million, of which 2.7 million only goes to the DRC, right, in that particular cluster. The used products, the used clothes, of course, is great competition for our manufacturing sector in this cluster, but it is not the only one that exists. The rest exists as well. Can I please get Kennedy's question? Hello.
Yes, I think he has written the question here on the chat. Does DRC have Does DRC have one-stop border post? If not, can EABC and EAC engage to help build and train to ease the flow at the borders?
Yes, actually, in the final report, you will, if you go to, I think it's page 20, there is a World Bank project called the Great Lakes Trade Facilitation Project, and it is one of that is one of its deliverables. The same as Trademark East Africa, it has got DRC programs, and those one for border posts is one of them. For instance, they plan to upgrade infrastructure and border systems at Muhangi and Goli in Uganda border crossings, and I think they plan to be done by 2023, right? So it is in the offing. And I think it's briefly presented in page 20 of the final report.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Eshel, for presenting the highlights and, of course, responding to all the questions from the participants. And I would like to welcome Vincent from GIZ to provide brief remarks before we close. GIZ was our partner in formulating this study. So please welcome Vincent for a few remarks as we close.
All right, thank you, Miriam. First, I want to again thank all of our speakers today for taking time out from your work and organizations to share this very interesting insight, just as you noticed, Miriam, yourself. This has really been helpful, and hopefully we can have more of such conversations as sectors and as a community going forward. Dr. Mathuki, Miriam, Patrick, and of course our researcher, Dr. Isel, I really thank you for your support and all through the process of this mini study. In terms of next steps from us here at Creating Perspectives, we will work with our partners, the EABC and the PMOs, to see if it can be feasible to organize any trade delegation or trip to Eastern DRC, whenever that can be possible, of course. But just again, I would like to thank our researcher and everyone for participating today. It's helpful to know that we have this community of support, and hopefully we can all continue to find ways to work together and do the work we are all trying to do around the region. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Miriam, our moderator today. Hopefully we'll all talk soon again. Thank you. And just one more thing, Miriam. We are going to hand over a copy of a report to EABC here right after this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Vincent. I think the CEO was to do the closing remarks, but unfortunately, he has been called to another meeting.
No, I will.
Oh, okay.
Close.
All right.
Sorry. Yeah, I want to take this opportunity, obviously, to thank for showing interest, and you can the need as to why we need to focus on DRC. I think for the interest of our media, particularly the media team that is participating in this very important event, you can clearly see there's an opportunity for almost $10 billion in DRC that the East African partner states can take advantage of. And I think it's the high time now, of course, as we call it East African Business Council, we are impressing upon the partner states of the EAC to fast track, of course, DRC joining the East African community. You know, the advantage of joining the community is that one, DRC will be able, of course, to take advantage of the common market as it were. Secondly, it will be able to benefit from the, the CET, the Common External Tariff Framework that is now existing within the EAC. We will be able, of course, as a community, again, to take advantage of the 80 million plus population in the DRC. And therefore, I wanted to, of course, request our partner state to fast track admitting DRC into the East African community. Of course, yourselves as members and as business people, you can see clearly there are opportunities. Why would China, for example, be the one leading, selling to DRC, which actually DRC is just next door neighbor to the EAC. So clearly here is an opportunity, and I think possibly with COVID challenges that have been brought and COVID telling us we need to look now more inwardly. We need to look at the market of the larger market of the EAC. And again, as we prepare now to join the African continent of free trade area, we need to start now thinking out. We need us to start now preparing to that one, and that preparation will be critical because we will be talking of we are talking of now the larger African continental market, and I think that becomes easier as we package ourselves as East African community, and it will be better, even of course more beneficial if, for example, now we were to negotiate with the entire Africa, when of course countries like DRC. Ethiopia, for example, are part and parcel of the East African community. We'll have a bigger bargain, it becomes easier. And I'm telling you, with the opportunities that exist within the community, it becomes quite interesting. So I wanted to thank all of you, members and of course participants for participating. Of course, I've seen members of Parliament, of Yellow Honorable Musyoka Kennedy, you are here. Thank you very much for creating time. Our board members who are here, and the rest. Of course, I've seen some comments coming from our members. Chairman Bitatura, you're saying you'd want looking forward to investing in DRC as we settle down. So thank you very much, and let's keep on scanning. I want to thank, of course, Creating Perspective GIZ for this good work. Dr. Aaron, well done. I think this is a good job, and I think going forward, we want to see how possibly we could enrich it and continue updating the research. Of course, I'm aware that we are supposed to be launching this officially, meaning that now you yourselves are supposed to be handing over this report to us. I don't know how you hand over it virtually. Possibly you may wish to guide us, but clearly now we want to own this report, of course, as council, together with Creating Perspectives, and we continue updating. So this is a working document. This is a document we are going to use to keep on updating and seeing what opportunities we can make out of DRC. So thank you very much, Daktari, and well done. I think you've done a good job. So let's, on behalf of the colleagues, appreciate your good work. Only I can. Yeah. So the next session is handing over the report. I don't know who's going to coordinate this. Patrick, is Patrick here? How do you do the reports?
Cheers.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, by the way, since Emmanuel Lubega, our colleague, is in Rwanda, you can every receive that report on our behalf. Emmanuel is there? Or do you have a board member around the office?
Don't have.
So Emmanuel can receive on our behalf. Emmanuel Lubega, please receive that report on our behalf from that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well done. Really appreciate. Yeah. Asanteni sana. Yeah, well done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. So Miriam, you may wish to close this now.
All right.
Yes, thank you everyone. Thank you CEO and all participants for joining in this session. I think as a part of your closing remarks, it is now up to us. For the private sector, it is up to us to take advantage of the opportunities that have been highlighted. For partner states, it is up to them to expedite the process of admitting DRC into EAC. And of course, for us, EABC and other business membership organizations, it is within us to advocate for smooth trade so that we realize these opportunities that have been highlighted today and presented in the report. For the circulation of the report, right after this meeting, the report will be available on our website, and also on our Twitter account at EABC Arusha. So it will all be available for everyone, and for our members, it will be sent to you via email. And for those that are not EABC members, we encourage you all to join EABC membership so that you can be a part of such insightful information and discussions. So on behalf of everyone, I would like to thank the EABC team and the Creating Perspectives that has been working behind in making sure that this session is successful. So thank you everyone, and thank you to all participants for joining. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And join EABC as members.